What's up, guys? Welcome back to the eCoreAcademy e-learning platform today. My name is AJay Raj, and I've come back for yet another video here on the eCoreAcademy YouTube channel. And before we get into this lesson, please make sure to smash that subscribe button, hit that like button, as well as hitting that bell to get notified on any of our latest posts. All right, let's get right into today's lesson. Today's lesson is all about types of joints in our anatomy and physiology course, and it's about categorizing all of these different joints in the human body. So as you may know, the body itself has various muscles, has various bones, but we have to know where the entire movement of the body occurs, and that's through joints. So joints are all throughout the body, and as I said before, it's where muscle and bone not necessarily meet, but they work together in order to create movement in the body. So let's get into categorizing all these different types of joints in the body, because this is actually a very important lesson, and it's a relatable lesson, since all of you can obviously relate as being humans with your own organic bodies and your various different joints. So let's get right into it. The very first general type of joint that we have is the ball and socket. This is an especially interesting one. It's where one side of the joint is a rounded ball-shaped bone, which fits into a cup-like socket of a different bone. So if you take one side of a bone that's basically rounded out, and then you take another bone, the ending of another bone, and it's almost shaped like a cup-like structure, as you can see here. This is the circular bone that kind of supinates in this ovular bone that's basically hollowed out. As you can see here, these two bones meet, and inside those bones there's a thick layer of tissue in order for the bones to rotate, because obviously there'd be too much friction if bones were rotating on bones. So this type of joint allows for a huge range of motion, and it can be found in the hips and the shoulders. And one thing about ball and socket joints is that they have the most range of motion of any other joint in the body, and basically they allow for full 360-degree motion. Although it's a bit limited with the amount of muscle and tendon tendon connections, as well as fibers that surround the bones, they actually still have the most motion, and they can technically supinate and roll for 360 degrees. And as you can see here, this is the shoulder joint that I'm showing here. This is the most common ball and socket joint. And of course, you have your hips. And unlike the hips, the shoulder is actually very prone to injury because of how thin that tissue layer is, and how thin these bones are. This supinating bone is. All right, so that's ball and socket joints. Let's get on to the next joint class. So the next class of joints is the condyloid joints. Condyloid. That's a weird word, but you'll get used to it after constant pronunciation. So the condyloid joint is an ovoid head of one bone that moves in an elliptical cavity of another, allowing all movements except axial rotation. So what basically happens here, it's a very similar concept to that of the ball and socket joint, except that you're losing an entire bone layer. So as you can see here in this little diagram, you have this central, basically ball-shaped structure, and that's actually the inner core of the bone. And as you can see here, this other piece of the bone is actually not surrounding that inner cortex of bone. The outer cortex is thin in that area. So what happens is it's almost like you're taking the ball and socket joint, except instead of splitting it half and half, supinating like this, you're putting it on an angle. Almost like you're putting it on an angle as if it were cut in half on a diagonal. And basically what happens is, in this case, you're actually limiting your motion here. You're limiting about 50% to 70% of your motion. And that's why the condyloid joint doesn't have as much motion. And it's located in the metacarpals in the wrist, as stated here. It's in the wrist to connect the radius and carpal bones. And that's called the metacarpal. That's your wrist bones, because they actually only have a limited motion, which is just frontal and backwards, front and back. And that's why it says no axial rotation is allowed. Axial rotation is up and down motion, so it's direct opposite. It's forward and backward motion. And it's also located at the base of the index finger, and that's a main reason why it's called our index finger, because index actually means majority control. And basically, our index finger has the highest amount of sensitivity, and you're able to move your index finger with a strain most accurately and most freely. All right, so that's condyloid joint. It's not very common in the body, but it is still important to know. So let's move on to the next joint class. So the next joint class we have here are the saddle joints, and it's similar movement to a condyloid joint. It's basically frontwards and backwards, and it's a joint where two saddle-shaped ends of a bone meet, and it's found in the thumbs. But the only difference between a saddle and a condyloid joint is that it creates a lot of friction, and the actual shape of the bone is very different, but the range of motion is very similar. This saddle joint actually has the least amount of movement, and it's obviously the least common because it's only found in the thumbs. So as you can see here, this little diagram, you have exerting force on every single angle here. So you have this bone here that meets, that's from the wrist. This is the bone that extends from the wrist. And this is the bone that connects the wrist to the thumb, basically, the base of the thumb. And what happens here is when you're moving backwards and forwards, you're basically rotating along this area. You're rotating in a circle. However, that creates lots of friction. So what happens is you have such thick muscle fibers on the ends of these of this meeting, on the ends of this thumb bone that's joining to the carpals of the wrist. What happens is you have so much friction there that you have such thick tissue there, and therefore you have such limited motion. And that's why you can only move frontwards and backwards, just like the condyloid joint, but just less motion in general. All right, let's move on to the next joint class. This is our hinge joint. This is rather more common than, say, the other two joints. And just to be clear here, most of the joints in the body are included in these general areas. That includes the limbs, which includes both of the arms and both of the legs, as well as the entire spine. So that includes the neck as well. So, and of course your hip. So it's not very common around the body, and they're actually much larger than, say, for example, your tendons and muscle, the plethora of how many you have. So, and that's important to know, because if that were the case, the body would be encompassing a lot more damage, and your tendons and tissues wouldn't be able to repair as easily. Because every time you move, every single step you take, you're actually damaging tissue, and the body needs time to heal that tissue. All right, so now moving on to hinge joint. I just went on a bit of a side point there, but hinge joints, they only allow flexing and extending movement. So that's very basic here, and it's found in the elbow, knee, and in the phalanges of both the fingers and toes. So what happens here in hinge joints is basically it moves frontwards and backwards off of a basic hinge. If you think about a hinge, it moves frontwards and backwards, frontwards and backwards. I don't know if you can see my arm, but just moving front and backwards. So it's a bit more limited than ball and socket, but it's the second most amount of movement, more than the condyloid and the saddle joints. And as you can see here, this little diagram, and what it means by flexing and non-flexing, basically, is if you take the elbow and you're moving it out, you're just extending your arm. When you move it back, you're actually flexing the muscle. So that's what happens there. And that's with any movement. It's an involuntary concept. And as you can see here, this little diagram of the actual joint put on an overview. It's just supinating inwards on the cylinder, and as you can see, it has definitely a lot more movement, just like the knee. But if you take your knee, you just can't move it sideways, otherwise you would have broken your knee or dislocated your knee or your elbow, and yeah, that's never a good thing. So let's get on to our final joint class, which is our pivot joints. And a pivot joint is when one bone rotates around another and allows rotational movement similar to that of a lid on a jar. So what basically happens is, as you can see here, this joint can be found in the forearm, where the ulna is attached to the rest of the arm. And the ulna is basically the central bone of the arm. There are two central bones, and ulna is one of them, and it connects the forearm to the rest of the arm. And basically what I'm saying here is that on the forearm, what happens is when you take a lid on a jar, and you're unscrewing it, you're actually making the jar come up higher. So you're basically extending its height or so before it actually comes off. So you're extending the height. So what happens is if you take your forearm here, right, you extend your forearm out. If you extend your forearm outwards like this with your palms up, it's actually longer than it is when you take it and rotate it with your hand up. So just try that. When you turn your hand like this here, your arm actually gets longer. Your forearm gets longer in length. And that's basically what happens. It's like a screwing point. Your arm is being screwed out. But this, of course, this is under control, and this is within millimeters of length. It's not necessarily something that you might see a difference in, but you actually see a difference in pressure and flexing. All right, guys. So that's our last joint class, and that's the end of the video. Thank you guys for tuning into the eCoreAcademy e-learning platform today. I had a pleasure making this video for you guys. As always, please like and subscribe to this video. Hit that bell, of course, to get notified on any of our latest posts. visit our website at eCoreAcademy.org. And of course, you can make an account to get all unlocked access to all of our worksheets, integrated quizzes, as well as notes that go along with each and every single video, and that is highlighted underneath its own separate course. And of course, visit all of our socials at Facebook, as you can see here, this link, Twitter, our Twitter link, Instagram, and of course, you can always email us at our Gmail at ecoreacademy@gmail.com. So once again, guys, it's been AJ. I had a pleasure making this video for you guys. I hope you guys enjoyed, got a lot of information out of it. And there will be definitely many more anatomy and physiology videos coming in the future. So until then, see you guys, and peace.